Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on careers in cloud computing with great learning. Can all of you hear me? Let's do a quick audio check. You guys can type in the response in the questions window. Can all of you hear me? Okay, great. So I have responses from Ayanjit and Deepak. All right. So thank you for joining in on a Saturday morning. And I welcome all of you again to this webinar. What we are going to do today is look at two things essentially. In the first half of this webinar, we'll look at what the cloud computing space is all about, what's the market like, and why are people going crazy about cloud computing as a career option, as well as an industry trend, and as well as something that the companies are adopting, at a very high pace, right? So we'll look at that in the first half. In the second half of this session, we'll look at what are the career options that people have. What are the skills that you might need, right? If you're aspiring to become a cloud architect or a cloud engineer, or even a cloud manager, right? And we'll finally look at how great learning and great legs together can help you in getting up to that particular, aspired position or your next career transition, right? So I hope with that the agenda becomes a little clear. If you have any questions to start with, I'm happy to answer now. Uh, do you guys, any of you, have questions as yet? Okay, so no questions now. All right, let's start in that case. So if you look at the first slide here, really, I don't have a title slide, right? I don't have a slide just telling you the name of this particular session and so on. Just to keep it really simple and straightforward, and to drive the point with what the market leaders are saying, right? So what people like Forbes and Gartner and even the best of the companies, right? Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Oracle, Alibaba, everybody is saying the future is cloud, right? Now, when you say the future is cloud, it's really not entirely true, um, because the present is also cloud, right? That's what I mean. Not just the future, the present also is cloud. And as you will see in the following slides, more than 90% of organizations, both small, large, and medium, are using cloud in some or the other form. And not just organizations, it's also individuals, individual professionals, students at universities. Everybody is literally using cloud in some or the other form, right? So what are people telling here? So it's a 400 billion plus dollar market globally. That's a huge market to be a part of as a professional, as a company. It also shows you the amount of investment that people are doing as far as cloud is concerned. Almost over 80% of the workloads, of enterprise workloads, will be sent to cloud by next year, right? It's already 2019. So almost all the workloads in enterprises are going to cloud, right? They already are, and they will continue to do so. More than 80% of companies have a multi-cloud strategy. Forget using one cloud, right? What we are saying here is 4 out of every fifth company is using more than one cloud platform, right? It's not just one cloud platform. So the approach has matured, the number of options have grown, the number of use cases people need to use has grown over time, and the number of professionals, because of all these reasons, the number of professionals that companies need will continue to grow, right? In the next 3, 4, 5 years. Now, in India specifically, the cloud services market is over $4 billion, right? And this will increase definitely with the adoption of all kinds of services that you have on cloud, including advanced services like IoT, machine learning, AI, etc. Right? Uh, some of you might even be surprised that even things like satellite imaging will come as a service on cloud, right? Very recently. In fact, if you read about what AWS is up to recently, even if you want a satellite out there to grab some images or do some weather forecasting for yourself, even as an individual, you can go and get a cloud service for that, right? So that's really fascinating with what all options do you have on the cloud, right? So I hope this sets the initial understanding and context of how exciting and how broad and promising this cloud market has become. And it is certainly a great time for you, if you're really interested in something like cloud, to become a cloud professional, right? Now, let's understand what is cloud in the first place. Okay. There are a lot of definitions. If you go to Wikipedia, there's a definition. If you go to NIST, which is a US-based standards organization, there's another definition. But to put it in a layman's term, right, cloud is essentially a different way of how you consume your IT services, right? Um, Everything else remains the same in principle, right? When I say that, you still have compute, you still have microprocessors, you have storage, RAM, hard drives, network cables, subnet, all of that stuff. As far as computers are concerned, computing and its science is concerned, and as far as programming is concerned, all of that is same, right? So if you're an infrastructure person, a few things will change, right? How you do your job will also change when you talk about cloud, but what you want to achieve really doesn't change that much, right? You still want reliability, you still want efficiency, you still want scalability, you still want a backup server, you still want geolocation and being close to the customer and all of that, right? So cloud is really a different way to use information technology and its services, right? So both hardware and software, right? So when you talk about cloud, it's really a utility model. Okay, it's a lease-based model. It's a model where you can consume something which is created by somebody else, right? So, for example, this is a very cliched examples. You can think about electricity, right? So, if you want electricity tomorrow in a house that you recently purchased, you don't have to set up a power station for that, right? You can simply apply for a connection and start consuming electricity. Similarly, if you have a new electronic device tomorrow, if you buy a new refrigerator or even an electric car, for example, again, you don't have to set up a power station. You can simply plug that refrigerator into a socket, which essentially is a plug and play model, and you can start consuming electricity. Now, take this analogy into computing and think about, if you wanted an extra machine, is there a plug and play model, right? Can you just call up somebody? Can you just go to a website, right? A digital socket in that case, and just plug and say, hey, I want an extra computer. Can you give it to me for like 2 days? I want to run an experiment, right? So that's what cloud is. You need something, either hardware or software, right? You get it for X amount of time. It could be a year, it could be 5 years, it could be 5 hours. You use it and then you give it back to the owner, right? So for example, if you're not consuming electricity, somebody else will, right? So if you're not using a cloud resource, of course somebody else will, unless you have reserved it. Okay, so that's in a very simple terms, that's what cloud essentially is. It's a utility model of computing. It's a model of computing where you can get services, both hardware and software, from a service provider, which we call cloud provider, right? So it's a lease-based model. Of course, there are a lot of other aspects to it. Without going into that, I just wanted to kind of help you understand what cloud is in very simple terms. Now, what are companies doing with cloud? Why is it so famous? If you look at the last 2 decades, there have been a lot of revolutions. One is the hardware revolution, right? If you look at the networking equipments, if you look at the switches and routers that you have, if you look at the telecom boom, if you look at the data speeds that you have now, if you look at the satellite evolution, the number of satellites India is launching, if you look at the cost of a hard drive, right, that has gone way cheaper. If you look at the amount of RAM storage that you have in your smartphones, it's mind-boggling. Like 6 GB of RAM, it wasn't even there in a laptop, right? 10 years ago. You have it in a smartphone today, right? So so broadband, the hardware revolution, the telecom sector, the software revolution, right? There are millions of developers today writing code, and it only increases every day. So all of this essentially has made IT a little democratic, right? So until about many years ago, let's say just before a decade, IT was a blocker, right? IT was a headache in a lot of sense, where companies were not IT companies themselves, right? So for banks, for retail stores, for shopping malls, for hospitals, for government organizations, for schools and universities, for payment companies, for example, uh, IT is really and has always been, right, and will always be an enabling service, an enabling function, a supporting function, right? So for banks, of course, if you imagine it today, it's a little difficult to relate to it if you do everything online. But for banks, IT is really an enabling function, right? That's not their core business. Okay, so if they have 1,000 servers, for example, if SBI tomorrow has and comes to you and say, hey, I am going to charge you 1,000 rupees every month extra from your account balance because I have 1 million servers to service you, right? Guess what? You will not be as amused with that. You're like, hey, I don't care how many servers you have. I just want to access my account and do banking, right? So companies today, they have evolved. They understand that IT is an enabling function, and that they should not get into the hassles of doing a lot of things. Okay, so they are spending less time in looking at the servers and in trying to fight with them, trying to keep them up all the time, because you do not get points for using X number of servers, right? You only get points in business for servicing your users, right? So that's why companies are excited about cloud, because cloud takes away all of this headache, all of this hassle of both hardware and software, and lets you focus on what your business is, right? What's your core concern? These are just some of the examples, some of new age companies which have used cloud at a global scale, right? They've grown very fast. They are the companies who've done their IPOs, fundraisers very quickly, who've served millions of customers globally across geographies, and such a hyper growth environment, such a list of hyper growth startups is not possible when you have IT, which is a barrier, right? Remember capital expenditure for a small business. If you had to buy 100 servers tomorrow as a new company, guess what? It's a lot of cost, right? Even if you say 2 lakh rupees per server, it's a lot of money that you need to put upfront. Unlike what cloud offers you, right? As a utility model, you use these 200 servers, just pay the bill and go home, right? You can come back and again take those machines. Now, so these are just some of the examples where these kind of companies have grown really fast, and that's why people are excited about cloud. So tomorrow, if you are an aspiring entrepreneur, if you have a startup idea, and if you think that IT is something that I really need to worry about, well, cloud can help you there, right? And it depends on certain use cases, but it's a lot of help that businesses get out of cloud computing. A few numbers here to convince you further about the case of cloud computing. So if you look at really the second row here, the middle row, all I want to show here is 3 boxes. So if you look at the first 2 boxes in the middle row, it's telling you what are the top 2 players. I'm sure most of you will be aware of this, that AWS and Microsoft Azure are are the top two market leaders as far as cloud computing is concerned. And the third thing that I want to show here is the top right box, right? With it says 85% of companies are using multiple clouds. So almost all the companies are using more than one cloud platform. The top two major players are AWS and Azure. And if you were to become a cloud professional, you should definitely learn AWS, and you should definitely also look forward to learning Azure, right? Especially if you're a Windows ecosystem person, especially if you're a Windows background professional, right? If you're a .NET developer, if you have been a Windows person throughout, Azure is something that you should definitely learn. But again, just a point here. Microsoft has evolved a lot, especially under Satya Nadella, and Azure is equally good for Linux as AWS is, right? In a lot of sense. So Azure is not just about Windows. That's a myth. Azure is also about Linux and all kinds of things that you can do on AWS. So Azure and AWS are the top two things you should aspire to learn as far as an aspiring cloud professional. The growth in the ecosystem is not just happening globally, it's also happening in India as well, right? So if you look at this trend over the last 4 years and also projected in the next year, the trend is quite linear, right? It's growing every year, and if you look at the 2020, it's almost 3 times the growth, right? So the growth is also happening in India, not just globally. If you talk about what kind of cloud people are using, there are different ways to deploy a cloud. So when you say, so there are three ways essentially, right? So there's public cloud, there is private cloud, and there is hybrid cloud, right? So public cloud is a cloud infrastructure which is open to general public, not just companies, right? So for example, when you say AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, etc., are public cloud platforms, even an individual can go and sign up for a Google Cloud account or an Azure or AWS account and start using all of their services, right? That's public cloud, open to everyone. On the other hand, private cloud is meant for specific enterprises, meant for either your own company or customer's company, and is a closed ecosystem, right? Uh, so private cloud is meant for individual enterprises. Public cloud is meant for everyone. Having said that, when you create something for yourself on public cloud, it's not that it is public to everyone, right? It is your resource. Nobody else can access it. So in terms of security, public cloud is equally good, right? If not more, as compared to private cloud. But without going into the security aspect and a lot of other things, uh, public cloud adoption is quite high, right? And again, if you see, AWS, Azure are the top two players. Google is really catching up fast. If you look at last year's Magic Quadrant from Gartner, Google Cloud is the third leader, right? According to Gartner, and it's really the third leader essentially. And my personal, feel about Google Cloud is that it will really ramp up fast because of all the basics being correct, right? So these are the top three platforms, and you should certainly watch out for Google Cloud because of their strong platform and their focus on enterprises, right? And giving more of a packaged approach to all the services. And IBM, VMware, Oracle are more active in the private cloud space, but IBM certainly has a public cloud offering as well. Right. And for the question, who is using cloud today? Like I said, more than 85% of the companies have been using cloud, and that to multiple cloud platforms. But if you also look at the Right Scale 2018 State of the Cloud report, almost 96% of the respondents are using cloud. Right. In what form and shape, that is not really the concern here. But what you really want to understand here is how many people are using cloud, and the answer is almost everyone. So let me take a pause here. Let me see if you have any questions. Okay. So I think I have two questions from Chaitanya. Chaitanya, these are, I think, career-related questions. Would you mind if we take it in the second half of this session, just in a little bit of time, when we talk about specific skills for careers? Yes, please stay tuned. I'll definitely answer your question. Okay, Sheetal has a question. What is idea to use private cloud over public cloud? So Sheetal, I'm assuming you're asking when would you use private cloud instead of public cloud, right? Okay. So essentially, there are two reasons why you would use private cloud, right? There are multiple use cases, of course. If you just go to Google and try to search when to use a private cloud, you will get multiple use cases. But there are essentially two factors to it. One is what kind of business are you in, right? So, for example, if you are a bank, right, you might go for a private cloud setup. If you're a forensics laboratory, you can go for a private cloud. If you're a security agency, uh, like like a police, like a CBI, like an FBI, you might want to go for a private cloud setup. So essentially, when businesses are concerned about the nature of their data, the security of their information, the security of their infrastructure, and the control that they want, right, that's when private cloud is essentially used, right? And also, if you want to customize a lot of things according to yourself. So, for example, if you wanted to create a cloud where the type of virtual machines available would be as per your specification, right? All of them. In that case, you would go for private cloud. So essentially, it's about control and security and customization, right? If you want all of that to a high degree, you would want a private cloud. That's briefly about it, Sheetal. Does that help you? Okay, okay. I already have a thumbs up from you, so I'll take it as a positive thing. Okay. Gyan Prakash is asking, how do you differentiate between private cloud and public cloud in cloud? Okay, so that's already a question which can confuse anybody, by the way. But Gyan, good question. Um, as far as this point in time is concerned, what I will suggest you is when you look at the cloud infrastructure, to answer your question, you should again ask a question: who is going to use this cloud, right? You should ask the question, who is going to use this cloud infrastructure? If the answer to that question is everybody can use and subscribe to this cloud publicly, it's a public cloud, right? But if the answer is, hey, people only in my organization can use this cloud infrastructure, that becomes a private cloud. It's not open to everyone. Gyan, does that answer your question? In that case, it becomes a private cloud. Gyan Prakash, did that help you? Does that answer your question? Yes, you are right. Cloud is essentially based on the idea of multiplexing and virtualizing and sharing resources, but sharing resources does not make it public. You can share resources within a development team also, right? Which is a closed team. Yeah. So sharing of resource and resource pooling is a generic computing concept. It happens everywhere. But public cloud is essentially about who can subscribe to your cloud services, right? Is it the general public? Is it individual, or is it anybody? If that is true, then it becomes public cloud. Okay. Um, Shivani is asking, please tell me about virtualization. Shivani, good question. What I'll do is I'll quickly tell you about what virtualization is, and we'll keep it limited in the context of this particular session, right? Because it's a technical topic and it might, kind of confuse a lot of people. So virtualization is essentially about consolidating your hardware, right, as well as software. So if you look at a single operating system, just to give you an example, right? So let's say you have Windows in your laptop or desktop, and if you wanted to use Linux, right? The first approach and the first brute force approach is to make two partitions in your hard drive and install Windows and Linux as well, right? And you log in separately to both of them, right? So when you're using Windows, you can't access Linux files. When you're using Linux, you can't access Windows files and vice versa. Now, virtualization is a technology which will help you create a Linux machine within the Windows ecosystem, right? Without creating hardware partitions essentially at a fundamental level, and also allowing you to switch between Linux and Windows, right? At the same time without rebooting. Okay, so that is OS virtualization, operating system virtualization. And you also have hardware virtualization. So essentially it's about sharing software or hardware resources between multiple tenants, right? Multiple users. Shivani, does that help you at a high level? Right? We'll need more time to understand. Yeah, yeah. So just as a basic definition, I think it helps you. Okay, great. All right. So okay, since the questions are all done, let's move on with the next slide. Right. So continuing our discussion here, as I was saying, the growth in cloud is not just happening globally, it's also happening in India. Now, the numbers here are a little dated, but to give you a sense of the trend, if you look at the green sections here, now the green sections represent traditional data centers, right? And traditional data centers are the ones where virtualization is not used, right? Where cloud-based technologies are not used. And the green will keep reducing, right? It has gone much further again, and both the blues that you see here are either public or private cloud systems. So the message here is, right, there are a lot of traditional data centers in the world, more so in India, and we need to transform all of these data centers from traditional setup to a virtualized and cloud-based data center, right? So that is also propelling growth as far as cloud is concerned. The adoption trend again is very, very strong. More than 90% of the folks are using cloud in some or the other form. Now we've spoken enough about the market itself. We've spoken about a lot of numbers. What is the trend? How many people are using cloud? How many companies are using cloud, and so on. Let's take a detour from here and talk about more about the technology aspects of what's driving cloud. So if you thought about cloud as a place where you can just get virtual machines or some extra storage like Dropbox or something else, where you're right, but if that is all you think about cloud, that's a very narrow perspective, right? Today, cloud is about more than hundreds of services, right? When I say service, it is essentially an information technology concept, an item that you want to use. So for example, a hard drive, right, is something that you might want to use. Okay, that becomes a cloud service because you are consuming it, you are using it by taking from somebody else, right? But it's essentially a piece of hardware that you rent from other people. You might want to use a folder, just a storage folder, and you want to store all the videos that you have, right? So that becomes something like an S3, an object storage. You might want to set up your own YouTube kind of website, right? For that, you will need content distribution networks. Again, content distribution networks, or CDNs, are a service from the cloud, right? Everybody's offering it. So all of these things, again, there are more than hundreds of services that you can take from cloud, including container services or microservices and so on. So there are a lot of other tangential technologies which are driving the growth of cloud, right? And all of these things are being offered on cloud to make it easy and efficient for you. So if you're a database person, if you would want to work on the future of databases, people today are talking about data lakes, right? Forget databases, forget data stores, forget data warehouses. People are talking about data lakes now. Essentially a concept which has all sorts of data storage techniques, right? So you'll have a data warehouse, you'll have a data store which is NoSQL based, you'll have an RDBMS, you'll have a file storage which is object storage, and so on, right? So all of that is again hosted and offered through cloud. If you're an infrastructure person, if you're a developer, containers are a revelation for you, right? They've helped you. Everybody knows Docker, everybody talks about Docker, and if you're writing microservices based applications, you're very likely to deploy them in Docker or other containers. And because it becomes complex, cloud gives you container orchestration services to help you all the complexity, right? There are companies today whose only product is a set of APIs, right? Now it's very difficult to imagine something like this, a few years ago, right? That there's a company whose only product is a set of APIs, right? A set of functions which other people are consuming. But that's true today because cloud helps you do that, right? There is serverless, there is edge computing, there's IoT. So all of these aspects are really driving and enabling the growth of cloud at a very high pace, right? So when you're talking about cloud, you should also be cognizant of all these, other streams of technologies. So ultimately, because of all that we've spoken, right, cloud professionals are in high demand. And if you are really interested in something like cloud, you should look forward to going into either of these domains and business buckets. Without going into the salary numbers here, let's understand a little bit more about what skills are required and what companies want from you as cloud professionals, right? Like I just said, there is much more to cloud than infrastructure. It is not only about VM or storage or a video file that you store remotely or even remote desktop, right? These are very old paradigms that people have in their mind, right, about cloud. Cloud is much broader. It is way beyond than just a VM, right? So if you're working on microservices or container-based applications, if you're doing all of things like Docker, DevOps, if you want a PaaS platform, if you want to do big data as a startup, cloud can help you do that. Now, just to give you a quick example here, if any of you watches Netflix, right? I'm sure everybody knows Netflix, uh, if not as a user, but at least as a company, right? So Netflix is one of the best companies in the world as far as engineering is concerned, and they have created amazing pieces of libraries, APIs, a lot of tools for you to use, right? And microservices as a concept was really driven by Netflix, right? So there are more than hundreds of microservices, small units of functionalities running together in sync, really like a nice musical orchestra to give you the experience that you have on Netflix, right? And that's the reason they can scale up very fast globally, right? So just to give you an example in context here. So cloud is much more than just a VM, yeah? And as an aspiring professional, you should definitely look forward to learning these skills if you want to become a cloud architect, right? For a cloud engineer, cloud governance and cloud security, even to a certain extent, big data and databases might not be that relevant for early career to mid career professionals. For mid to senior, right? If you're about 6, 7, 8+ years of experience, if you want to become an architect, really, you should have all of these skills as part of your portfolio, and not just by theory, but also by hands-on practice. Okay, so I see two questions here, one from Shivani, the other from Sheetal. Okay, so Shivani is asking why banks are not using cloud, why they are using their own data centers. Shivani, that's not true, first of all. Banks are using cloud. If you want, you can also research about this. But I'll tell you the areas where banks are not using cloud, right? So banks are using cloud for applications and data which is not sensitive, right? Which is not personally identifiable information, PIA. PII, right? So according to government regulations, you cannot store personal information outside national boundaries, right? Outside India, outside EU, and so on. So banks are using cloud, but for things that are not, security sensitive. Shivani, does that answer your question? That's not entirely true, by the way. Sheetal, what is edge computing? All right, so Sheetal, I hope you were aware of the client server architecture. That was the craze just about a decade back before cloud came in. So Sheetal, are you aware about the client server architecture? The essential request response thing? Yeah, perfect. So if you look at the client server architecture, the processing, the intelligence, right, and all the business logic got executed on the server, right, not on the client. On the client, you usually had, things from a presentation perspective, right? Things got rendered and you got the response. So are we good until this point, Sheetal? The intelligence in client server, the processing in client server was with the server, not with the client, right? Your client could be a browser, it could be a desktop application, and so on, which is connected to the internet. But in edge computing, what we are saying is the server should not be throttled with all sorts of processing logic, right? So the server should not have all the responsibility of processing. Some work can also be done on the client machines. So some intelligence can also be sent to client machines, right? So to give you an example in point here, if you have an IoT infrastructure, for example, let's say you have a washing machine, or let's say you have a refrigerator, which is IoT enabled, right? And that refrigerator is connected to your mobile application where you see all the analytics, right? What has been the temperature of your fridge in the last, five months? What has been the pressure, the compressor health, and so on, right? Let's say if you have such a refrigerator. Now there are two ways to do things here. You can either run the analytics algorithm completely on your mobile app. Okay, that is centralized processing. The other way to do is you can run some of the processing to save your server capacity, your mobile, processing capacity on the refrigerator sensor itself. So if you do some algorithmic processing on the refrigerator sensor, that becomes edge computing. That is the edge of your IoT network, right? And you're doing some form of computing there, which essentially saves your server capacity, right? And if you compound this, right, it results in a lot of saving for a global infrastructure in terms of computing capacity, the efficiency, and so on. Sheetal, does that answer your question? Just a small example of edge computing. Okay, great. And for your final question, Sheetal, is security a concern in cloud? Yes, but security is concern everywhere, essentially, right? Before cloud also, security was a concern, and it will always be, because no matter what the computing infrastructure is, there are a lot of people who are trying to hack into your systems and infrastructure, right? So it is a concern, but to tell you what, if $400 billion is being invested in the global market, and if FBI in US is using Amazon Cloud, right? And if government of India is storing your Aadhaar data on cloud, right? It's business as usual, right? So it's not a massive security threat, but it will always be, irrespective of whether it is cloud or not. Yeah. Okay. So Shivani has a question. Shivani, there's no difference, to be perfectly honest with you, right? Hosting is hosting, no matter where you do it. Yeah. So if you host your website on Wix.com, it is the same for you. If you host your website on AWS or Azure, it is the same thing for you. You get access to a cPanel, you update your files, you finalize your DNS, the numbers, the specifications, and once the DNS is set up, once you have a domain name, once everything is done, your website is up, right? So Shivani, there's no difference, to be perfectly honest with you, because hosting is always remote, and as far as the machine is remote, for us, it means the same thing. right? Shivani, does that clarify your question? Okay, so I hope Shivani is still there. I don't have a response yet, but okay, let's move on to the final phase of this session, and we'll again take in questions towards the end, right? So what are we saying here? These are the skills that an aspiring cloud architect should know, and let's see how to go about it, right? And how can we help you? Before we go into what we offer from Great Learning and Great Lakes to help you upskill as a cloud architect, a piece of advice here from employers around the world is please do not become a paper certified architect, right? Try to become a hands-on architect who knows how to build solutions, right? And when you're approaching certifications, they should be done after significant amount of hands-on experience, right? Certifications should act as a validation of your skills and not as a replacement of your skills, right? So work on AWS, work on Azure, work on Google, build a couple of projects and solutions, build a couple of labs, and then go and do your certification, right? If you don't do that, you might get a certification, but it will not serve you well, because guess what? When you go in an interview, right? When you get into an interview room, your experience takes over, right? Your credentials, your degree, your diploma, your certificates of appreciation are all there in that folder. They are not talking. You are the one who's talking, right? So your experience takes over, and that's what you should focus on building, right? That's what we do as part of the program that we offer, and the postgraduate program in cloud computing that Great Learning offers in academic collaboration with Great Lakes. It's a 6-month executive program. It's a program specially designed for working professionals. So you can pursue it on the weekends while also doing your work on the other 5 days. It's a program designed for people who want to become cloud architects, right? Now, certainly all of you might not go and become cloud architects, right? You might have different priorities and ambitions, but what I really mean here is all cloud professionals at mid to senior level should aspire to think like architects, right? So that's what we mean by people wanting to become architects, right? Because if you're an architect in your mind, you will always take a balanced approach. You will always take an informed approach to a problem, right? And you will also be able to say, hey, for this particular problem, we don't really need a cloud solution, right? Or we need a cloud solution, or we need a hybrid cloud solution, right? So that's what we want all of you to become as aspiring professionals. This program specifically is completely online, and you will have work assigned to you for weekdays as well as weekends. And there is tons and tons of hands-on work and exposure as part of the 6-month program. Who will you learn from? You will learn from people who practice cloud in the industry, right? And you will finally have the certificate from one of the top institutions of the country, which is Great Lakes Great Lakes Institute of Management, and it's ranked in the top 10 business schools in the country, right? Even by multiple rankings just last year. In terms of what would you learn, right? It's a very holistic program. It's a very comprehensive program. So you start with learning, the fundamentals in in an absolute rigorous fashion. You learn AWS, and then you have the option of learning either Azure or Google Cloud, right? You can pick either of them. You will also work with containers, microservices, DevOps, cloud design patterns, and private cloud as of now in OpenStack. Because you guys are going to think like architects, you also need to understand numbers, right? Cloud financials, what is the costing of each service that you want to use, adoption and migration patterns, how to create a roadmap for your customers, and so on. You also need to understand big data at a fundamental level, because no matter what application you're building, there is always going to be a lot of data, right? And your company and your CEOs will want insight from it, right? And for the developers amongst you, right, this is completely optional, and this is something that you will do after finishing all the requirements of PGPCC. We have a special developer track where we teach you cloud native development, where we teach you serverless in depth, right? Things like Lambda, Azure functions, and so on, either of the platforms. So there is an optional developer track that you can take as part of PGPCC at no extra cost, right? So that's a summary level thing of what you will learn, and just a snapshot of the kind of people you will learn from. This is just an indicative list. There are many more people involved here. So you have former chief architects, you have cloud solutions architect at Microsoft who are teaching you Azure, you have big data consultants and experts, you have CTOs at leading companies, right? I am myself one of the instructors in the program, but this is just an indicative list, and there are many more mentors and faculties involved, right, in teaching you. A typical class profile is quite diverse, right? If then this is averaged out from all of our past batches. You will have classmates from all different types of domains and backgrounds, right? You'll have people from consulting, people from manufacturing, telecom, BFSI, even healthcare, and obviously, IT and technology. You'll have all sorts of qualifications as well, but more so important, you will have people from all sorts of experience buckets, right? So the average experience is 11 years. So it's a very informed and experienced class that you will become a part of, right? And it's certainly great to be a part of such a class. And if you guys have a question as what will I do as part of the program, you'll do two simple things: learn everything about cloud computing and practice it, right? You will build a lot of stuff, and that is what we evaluate you on. There are very few theory quizzes, there are very few MCQ based quizzes, right? But most of your evaluation is based on the hands-on work that you do. And about the hands-on work that you will do as part of the program, this is just a sample testimonial. This is an actual email that was sent by one of our students just a few months back, right? So the student, the learner, did a project as part of PGPCC, and he was so excited and happy about his learning outcomes that he took the same project, which is essentially a cloud-based Dropbox-like service, and implemented it in his own company, right? In his own department in production, not just staging, right? So these are the kind of things you will work upon. These are the kind of this is the kind of impact you can expect on your career, right? When you talk about real-life use cases. The icing on the cake here is that all of the AWS concepts that you learn, or our AWS specialization, is in collaboration with AWS Educate, right? So it's a further validation of the kind of things that we are doing here. And as part of this relationship, as part of our collaboration with AWS Educate, you get a lot of free resources to learn from, but most importantly, you also get the global AWS Educate job board, where not just AWS, but their partners across the world, publish jobs which you can apply, right? And you will have access to this for 1 year, from the date of your enrollment. We also help you through career support, right? We share career opportunities with you. We do targeted career drives for our companies, for our professionals as well, and we connect both of these parties together, essentially, right? So just in a few days, we are about to do a career drive with a large Indian service company, right? Without going into the name, and we also have our own job board. We do hackathons. You can also reach us to for one-to-one career mentorship and so on. So this is the link where you can go and check about what we do as far as career support is concerned. And I really hope this answers all of your questions as far as your career and transition is concerned. So, and if you have any further questions, definitely feel free to reach out to us. So that's about it as far as the the discussion from my side was concerned today. And what we can do is we can look at the questions that we have from all of you, and I'll try my best to answer these. Okay, so Atib has a question. What is the question? I want to know that what's the difference in PGPCC and normal AWS and Azure courses? Okay, great question, Atib. So Atib, PGPCC is a very comprehensive and balanced cloud program. We are not brand ambassadors of AWS or Azure. And for your question, when you do AWS certification and Azure certification, they have a very specific path of learning with one aim of having you clear the certification exam. Okay. They do test you on MCQ based questions, on situational questions as well, right? That has improved recently, but they don't really test you on your hands on skills, right? Unless you are a very diligent person, unless you have practiced multiple solutions by yourself, unless you have built a lot of projects by yourself, if you are that proactive, it is different. But 99% of the people do not do hands-on solution building before taking a certification course, right? And that is the problem, right? They have the certification, but when you interview them, they are unable to suggest a solution to a customer. They are unable to connect different pieces of the puzzle and give you one holistic solution, right? That's what we focus on in PGPCC. And if you look at the curriculum, AWS and Azure are just about 2.5 months of the program, right? And the program is 6 months. So guess what? The rest of the 3.5, 4 months, we are also teaching you other important things, like I mentioned, which are necessary for a cloud architect, right? Cloud financials, adoption, DevOps, containers and microservices. That is something you do not get in any certification, right? Adib, does that help you get an idea of why it's different? Right, it's about you understanding the solution building approach, right? More than anything else. So services you can understand. What EC2 does is very easy. Google will tell you. What S3 is doing, Google will tell you. But when to combine these two and in how, that is something that not many people can tell you. Yeah. Okay, so Deepak has a question. um, okay, so Deepak, just give me 1 minute. Shivani, how to join this certification? It's rather a PG program. So Shivani, you can go to our website, right? And you can also call on the number that I have given to you. And just click on the PG program in cloud computing icon. Shivani, do you see the number in front of you on the screen? You can just reach out to us. You can just write here on this email. And the admissions team will get in touch with you for a discussion. Does that help you, Shivani? Okay, cool. Right. Coming back to Deepak's question, I am learning DevOps, but my aim is to build a solution for customers. How will I go ahead to achieve that? Deepak, that's exactly the question that we are trying to answer with our program here. And essentially, to build a solution for your customers, you need to understand the customer problem first, right? So that's step one, and then the final step is obviously deploying the solution and rolling out to your customer, and then helping them adopt it, right? That's another challenge. So that's what you can do with our capstone project that we have as part of the program. So the capstone project in PGPCC is a 3-month experience in a team setup, right? And you pick up a problem. We are also happy to assign a problem to you. And with your team, you start from consulting, right? You assume there's a problem, you talk to people, you narrow down the problem scope, and take all the steps, right? Architecture, design, and deployment, and so on. That's how you learn solution building, Deepak, right? And DevOps, if you're learning, that will certainly help you. But DevOps is just one course out of many courses in PGPCC, so that should help you. Yeah. Okay. All right. But good question, Deepak. Okay, Sheetal has a question. I am from QA background and have very less exposure to some parts of, okay, example, big data. In such case, how will this help me? Sheetal, coming from QA will definitely help you in understanding why DevOps is important, right? And what DevOps is essentially. So that will help you in 10% of the program. But for all the other things, right? Learning the basics of cloud, absolutely. What is big data from basics? That is something we will teach you. Okay, that is something you can learn from the program. But that's a resolution you will have to make, right? That hey, this is my background. I don't have this exposure, but there is this program which is willing to help me through understand all of these things, right? And you might not immediately become an architect because you will need to spend some time, right, working on these things, but you will get all the resources that you need on your CV as well as your in your mind to become an architect in some time. Sheetal, does that help you? So the program will help you learn these things. Hey Sheetal, did I answer your question? Okay, let me wait for the response. Okay, all right, great. Thank you for responding. All right, Deepak has another question. I'm a network engineer now after taking this program. How to, um, okay. So Deepak, that's a very natural background for somebody to learn cloud. And about transition, once you learn all of these things, you can apply for roles like cloud architect if you're a senior person. If your experience is about 7 to 8 years plus, right? If it is less than 7 years, you can apply for a cloud engineer position or a senior cloud engineer position, right? Or a cloud lead. So that is something we can discuss again later. But it's a very natural transition for you. Don't worry about it. Deepak, I hope that helps you. Okay. Chaitanya, can an Oracle DBA with 11 plus years experience transition to cloud role, and what career opportunities will be there for people like me? Is any programming experience required for cloud architect role? Chaitanya, great question. For the programming part, it is nice to have, it is not mandatory. Okay. So if you understand programming, if you have some experience, it's obviously helpful, right? But it's not mandatory, so it's not required. But understanding what programmers do will certainly help you in things like DevOps, right? As far as your Oracle DBA background is concerned, you can also become a cloud data lake architect, right? Because you understand data, because you understand data warehousing, probably because you understand databases and data stores and what analytics role plays. You can also become a cloud big data architect, right? So there are a lot of branchings, there are a lot of ways in which you can make a career in cloud. It's not just there's only one designation as cloud architect. There are multiple ways. So what I'll recommend you is, just go to LinkedIn Jobs and search for, cloud data architects, data warehousing architects on AWS or Azure, and so on, right? You can become an IoT data architect for that matter. So Chaitanya, there are a lot of ways in which you can make the most of your background, and not just whether you are a DBA or a network person or a QA or a DevOps person. Even CXOs and CTOs need to understand cloud, right? So because you need to have that context in your daily practice at work. Yeah. Chaitanya, I hope that helps you. Sheetal, that is correct. There are many aspects, right? And we need to learn all of that to grow in our careers, right? We'll help you get there. Don't worry about it. 6 months is a very long time. Yeah, you're right. There are many aspects. Sheetal, again for your question, is 6 months enough? Well, 6 months is enough to get started, but for you to become an expert, you will need to practice it even after 6 months, right? So remember, it's like the engineering program that you do, right? It's the degree. It's like the MBA degree that you do. If you ask me, hey, is 2 years enough for me to become the best manager in the world? Well, you will understand what a good manager should be, but you need to practice that management skill, right? Over and over again in your work life. So Sheetal, it's that analogy. 6 months is enough for you to learn all of these things, but to master them, you will need to practice it even beyond. Yeah. Okay, Ravi has a question. I have been working in middleware tools, Java, and how difficult will the transition to become an architect, having almost 9 years of experience? So Ravi, that's a very solid background. If you have done Java development, if you've done middleware tools, you already understand a certain aspect of cloud, because middleware is when your messaging, your pub sub model, your microservices based architecture, all of that kind of relates to it. SOA based architecture, right? So it should be good for you, this transition. But certainly you will need to work upon all of the other areas that companies expect you to. Yeah. Ravi, does that help you with your question? Okay, great. Chaitanya, okay, I'm sorry I didn't get that IoT with cloud. Okay, Chaitanya, my point there was, if you look at the term IoT, it is essentially, if you look at the basis of what IoT is, it's cloud, right? So Internet of Things is essentially about three things, right? About sensors emitting data, about the storage where you kind of keep your data, and about the analytics and insights that you derive from it through machine learning and AI. Yeah. So IoT goes very well with cloud, and you will need cloud to do IoT at a global scale, right? So that's what I meant, Chaitanya. Okay. So the good thing is, we are right. We've exhausted all of our questions. We're right on time, and this is a great point to stop for today in the interest of time. What I'll recommend for each one of you is, if you have any further questions, please absolutely feel free to write to this email ID in front of you, or just call up on this particular number, and discuss your questions and thoughts with us. We'll be very happy to work with you for your career. So thank you once again, everyone. Thank you for taking out time on a weekend. I really appreciate it. And I wish each one of you a very all the best for your career endeavors. Thank you.